Alright, so now we're going to talk about Japan's modernization and imperialism in Southeast Asia. So, the arrival of foreign powers in the 1800s triggered a massive change, but the Tokugawa shogunate was what ruled Japan for a while. And again, this works similar to China. I remember, especially if you were here at the last video, you saw that they were this big power, and then since they were this big power, they're like, no, we don't want to trade with you because we don't want you to be better than us. So we're just gonna cut you out. We're just gonna isolate ourselves. But that allowed them to fall behind because now with the Industrial Revolution again, other powers were able to go up, and they were also oblivious to the fact that they were behind because they didn't even know the modernizations that were being held.
So Matthew said that perfectly. Japan, China, they thought that their way was the best way, but then Japan saw what happened to China. They're lucky that China was picked first because they saw, wow, like we are really behind the rest of the world and we need to do something about it. So
there were also many other reasons why they were struggling. Japan, again, because they were really good at some point, they didn't think they had to modernize originally, but the economy was struggling because it wasn't efficient. We talked about the efficiency of...
do you want to tell them what the shogunate was?
What?
Do you want to tell them what the shogunate was?
Oh yeah, so the Tokugawa shogunate was, so the shogun is in America, the leader of the military is the president, but in a lot of other countries, there is a specific there's a major general. There's a guy that is the president of just the military, and that was the shogun. It was a strict military government that kept Japan isolated from the outside world, which means that their culture was surrounded, around the shogunate, and that meant that the military was more cultural.
And it was very traditional.
It was very traditional, yeah, exactly. Cultural and traditional usually go hand in hand, especially in this case. And since it's so traditional, instead of everyone else got guns and stuff, but they're still fighting with their cool looking swords, but they don't do it.
Yeah, so
there's also a rigid class system. Similar to India,
Samurais.
You were born into peasantry, and then you couldn't get out of it, which was the complete opposite to the Industrial Revolution, where now some free market enterprise was introduced, and you could create your own business so you can get out of the trenches.
So now we go into a little bit of the opening of Japan. So in 1853, everything changed. I don't know if you guys remember Commodore Matthew Perry. He was with the United States. He sailed into the Tokyo Bay, which is in Japan, obviously, with steamships, and he demanded that they open up to trade or else. Or else obviously implied war, which the Japanese...
They would not have won.
They had no chance. So the next year, Japan signed the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened ports to the United States, and it was a humiliating moment for them.
And a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call. Like, okay, we had to modernize fast. China also maybe we have to modernize fast. But Japan actually did that because they knew that if they didn't modernize fast, they would become a colony. And that started the Meiji Restoration, which was a revolution. Again, it does fall into the revolution category because their whole system of society changed, but it didn't have bloodshed. It wasn't like the rebels versus other people. Everyone was on board with it. It was a revolution without bloodshed. The shogun was overthrown, and there was a new emperor created. Again, this emperor was elevated because a good reason why most revolutions fail was because they don't have the power of the people. But since they elevated their ruler, now the people was like, oh my God, I need to please this ruler. So then everyone modernized pretty quickly.
So the Emperor Meiji was a teenager. Meiji, doesn't matter. Was a teenager named Mochihitu, and he was given power. So the Meiji Restoration began, and what? So this focused on modernizing Japan while also preserving Japan's identity. Matthew talked a lot about how China was very iffy on whether or not they wanted to join the West or stick to their traditions. Meanwhile, Japan is the perfect example of how to do both.
Yes, they did do both really well. They implemented many Western ideas, but they put a little Japanese cultural twist on it.
So they had a few slogans: honor the empire, expel the barbarians, and enrich the country. They're all pretty self-explanatory. It sort of showed what their goals was. There was also strength in the military, so I didn't see that. And those became the goals of everyone. Everyone wanted these to happen. And they studied the West, they copied it, but they put their own spin on it.
The military was big because the military, I know, like, the militarism and the social aspect of things don't really go hand in hand usually, but in Japan it did. And when they abolished the shogun, then that caused all of the social classes to kind of melt away, and now people are able to build themselves up.
And on top of that, the military in Japan, there was a lot of pride. You were proud to be a samurai. So to sort of get rid of that and go Western was a big move, but Japan knew they had to do it. So what they did is they created a new constitution, which was they created a diet, which was just basically a parliament system.
A diet, bro.
Something funny?
Yeah.
All right. And autocratic rule, which was rule of the autocrats, obviously. So they had class privileges. The samurai were abolished, as we just said. And now they started to modernize socially. They started to create railroads, banks. They were building an education system, industries. People said it almost felt like it appeared overnight because they really just did it like that. They knew it had to get done, and they knew they didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
So,
and that was all because they were able to get the power of people through nationalism, through that elevated ruler.
So powerful business families called, let's see, Mr. Him.
Zaibatsu.
So Zaibatsu, which was powerful business families, emerged. They controlled steel, banking, and trade. And Japan transformed from a feudal, outdated society into an industrial and soon-to-be imperial powerhouse, basically overnight. Which is how we get to the empire building of Japan and the 5 isms, which you guys should all remember.
Nationalism, industrialism, militarism, and imperialism. The Meiji era was driven by those things. And ethnocentrism.
So just to go back and define all of them, nationalism,
pride in Japan's uniqueness.
Industrialism, factories, railroads, tech.
Militarism, a strong army and navy.
Imperialism, taking land to gain power.
And ethnocentrism, belief in cultural superiority.
So Japan, obviously, now that they were no longer isolated, they needed natural resources, but that meant that they had to go get them somewhere else because they didn't have a lot of them themselves. So in 1894, they defeated China in the Sino-Japanese War and took Korea. We talked about that in the last video, sort of a parallel. You wanted to make the parallel, right?
Of course I did, yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, it's sort of, okay, yeah, no, but I'm saying it just shows how Japan and China were going through the same thing, but Japan came out on top because they knew how to do it right. Then in 1904, they absolutely shocked the world. Because the thing is, they were kind of doing this sort of quietly. People didn't really give them a lot of respect until they defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. And it was the first time an Asian nation had ever been a European nation in war in the history of the world.
Yep. And then by 1912, as the Meiji Emperor died, Japan had risen as a world power. And that did mean that, they were great, but they also became a little aggressive, and that is kind of what forced their loss in World War II. But we'll talk about that later.
So we get into imperialism in Southeast Asia. So while this is sort of on a separate note, so while Japan was rising, the Western powers, they were going ham on Southeast Asia. And you might ask why. So just to answer that, the region they had a lot of trade routes that were beneficial to economies, and they had a lot of resources like spices, rubber, tin, oil. Yeah, spices is huge. So Britain, they expanded into Burma, Malaya, and Singapore, which were major Southeast Asian cities and major port cities for trade. France took Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, which together they called the French, what does it say? Indochina. And we actually talked about that today in Global, or maybe yesterday for you guys. Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, that area during the Cold War, which we'll get to.
Mm-hmm. Well, the U.S. joined in too, taking the Philippines after the Spanish-American War in 1898. But there's one exception, which was Siam, or what's now is Thailand, and it's ruled by King Mongkut, who skillfully modernized his country and played European powers against each other. Now, this thing of modernization and how modernization kind of saves someone is really apparent. Like, we've only done this a couple times, but it's apparent in Japan in comparison to China. It's apparent in Thailand in comparison to Cambodia. And I don't know if you remember this, but it's apparent in What was the South Park episode? I don't know why. It was like
Ethiopia.
yeah.
Ethiopia.
And Ethiopia, if you don't remember when everyone opened the treasure chest of Ethiopia, the king of Ethiopia,
Sure.
yes, I'm positive, the king of Ethiopia sent their guys to like Britain and stuff, sent them back, they got all these new ideas, and that's how Ethiopia stayed still when all the other countries around it were getting imperialized.
So that's it for Japan, the Meiji Restoration, and the Southeast
Meiji.
Imperialism. Meiji, sorry. So next we're gonna go to some fun topics, which is World War I and the Russian Revolution. So we'll see you guys. Woo!